Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. Chodesh Tov, Boker Tov. So let's continue. We're on Masechet Beitzah Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph is where we got up to. We're working our way through the second parak, nearly at the end. Still take us a few more shiurim to get there, but let's pick it up from the two dots. So if you have a look, maybe 10 lines up from the bottom of the narrow lines, two dots says Bao Mine Merav Huna. Bao Mine Merav Huna. Hane bnei vaga de ramu alayu kimcha divnei chela. Ma'u le'afuta b'yom tov. Okay, so the question is, the bnei vaga, the people, the Jews that are living in these villages, they asked Rav Huna if the ramu alayu kimcha divnei chela, the kings, the soldiers come through, and the tax is that they have to go and they have to bake bread for the soldiers as they're passing through. These are non-Jewish soldiers, of course. Are they allowed to do that on Yom Tov? Says Rashi, these are Jews living in these villages. They threw upon them, so to speak, this the flour, the bread, right, the taxes for these soldiers. The king forces them to go and to cook and bake for them, right? When they're passing through. Oh, welcome. Zrizim Akdimin. Kohanim Zrizim Hem. Managed to make it just in time. Okay. So, Maulef Otabi Yom Tov Amar, Hazina I Yavu Le'lifta Le'anuka V'lo Kapti, Kochada V'chada Chazeh Le'anuka. So he says, it depends. Says Rav Huna. He says, what happens, again, the question is obviously on Yom Tov. During the weekday, there's no problem to do this. But on Yom Tov, to cook for the soldiers who are, of course, not Jewish. So he says, if you were to take the piece of bread and to give it not to the soldiers, but to give it to a child, right, to one of your kids, the lock up there, and they were not makbid. Maybe these Bnei Chela, these soldiers of the king, are not makbid on that. So therefore, that means that each and every piece of bread, each and every loaf that you bake could, in theory, you could give it to a Jewish child instead of to these soldiers. And therefore, it says if you were cooking for Jews, v'shali, and then it would be permitted. And if not, it would be forbidden. Okay, so what do we see from Rav Huna? Rav Huna says even if the cooking that you're doing is not actually for a Jew, but it could be, then that would be okay. That would be okay. Again, whether that means that you can rely on this like a tchila or this is only a heter in a shat adchak, so that is not so clear from this point in the Gemara. V'atanya, but now he's hanging on a sec. Don't we say he has a contradiction? Oh, right. Maaseh b'shimon ha'teimani shelo ba emesh lebeit hamidrash b'shachrit metzol b'Yehuda ben Bava amer lo memnei ma lo bat emesh lebeit hamidrash. So you do not come the night of Yom Tov. You do not come to the Beit Hamidrash. The next morning, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava saw him and he said to him, "Where were you yesterday?" Marlo baleshet balilenu v'ksha lechtof et kol ha'ir v'shachatnu lahem egel v'chanum uptanum leshalom. So they didn't come to the Beit Midrash yesterday because we had a bit of an incident, as you would say nowadays. What was the incident? That baleshet, says Rashi, chen gadol shel gedudei nochlim shemachapsimu uboshin lishlol shlal. Okay, so this marauding army, so to speak, came to our town. Now, this was not a case of pikuach nefesh. That's the implication, because if it was pikuach nefesh, then you could certainly cook for them, do whatever you needed to do. But that was not the case. But they came, and they were going through the town, and they were going through plundering and taking their spoils. So he says, they arrived. So what did we do? They wanted to come and raid the whole city. So shachachnu lahem egel ve'chalnum uptanum leshalom. So what do? We slaughtered a calf and we gave them a nice meal, and with that they were happy. It reminds us of the story, right? Nowadays, in our own time, on October 7th, everybody knows the story. In one of the homes they broke into in Ofakim, there was I think her name was Rachel, who was able to hold back the terrorists. She said to them, "Oh, you must be hungry, you must be whatever." So she gave them cake and she fed them and did this whole thing until eventually the police were able to come and kill the terrorists and rescue her. So it was there was a true story that happened. Unbelievable, the creativity and the ingenuity and the resilience. Unfortunately, not every story ended like that, as we know. Far too many did not. But that's what happened. That was the famous story in Ofakim. So similar thing over here. Says they came along and they're raiding the city. They wonder, they say, stop. You should eat. We'll give you some food. The whole thing. But what do you see? Again, it's not here. It doesn't seem to be a case of pikuach nefesh. It seems to be a case of monetary loss. And but they went and they. How could you do the shchita and the bishul for non-Jew on Shabbat? On Yom Tov, excuse me. So Amarlo, Tameanim lo etzaschachem befsetchem. So it says Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, I don't understand. What did you gain from that? Have a look at Rashi. He says, Yetzaschalchem, shenistakaltem b'mamon. Again, that's the understanding that this is not about sakanat nefashot. If it was, they could do whatever needed to be done. But it you saved your money, meaning you gave them this food, you gave them this meal, and therefore they didn't plunder all your possessions. So shenistakal mamon yatsa ve'avad bishvil hefsed onesh etanshua chilo yom tov. So you gained what you gained in monetary gain, you lost in the fact that you're machalel yom tov. What does that help you? So we say so therefore we see that's not like the opinion of Rav Huna, seemingly. And now here's the proof. Back in the Gemara, it says, how do we know that? Right, it says in the Torah, lachem, and the implication is lachem v'lo lavdei kochavim. We're allowed to cook for ochel nefesh for you, but not for non-Jews who are not obligated in Yom Tov. So v'amai hachazi lamecha mine. Okay, now we just said, according to Rav Huna, who said that if it's fitting that you could eat from it, right? Because that was his whole thing. That with this the stuff they were baking for the soldiers, if you could give it to a Jewish child and they wouldn't be makbid, so each bit that you cook is ra'ui for you, even though you end up cooking it for non-Jews, it should still be mutar. Right? So that's the contradiction. So Rav Yosef, no ego trefa. So Rav Yosef says, no, this case was different. Yeah, it's not actually fit for Jews to eat because it was a treifa, and we did the shkita on a treifa that you can eat to non-Jews. V'ha chazi leklavim. Okay, now we get into an interesting sukkah. He says, nonetheless, it's fit maybe not for you to eat because of treifa. It's fit for animals, for your dogs. You can feed it to them. So, are you now allowed to cook? Or do melech tochal nefesh, not for you, but for the sake of your animals which also have to rest, in a sense, on Shabbat and Yom Tov. So are you allowed to cook for them? So this is going to be a machloket Tanaim. Tanai with 3 lines from the bottom. We say Tanai. That's the pasuk. So what is the lachem? What is that coming to teach us? First of all, it says, this is where we learn that we can discuss later on the union of shaveh lekol nefesh. But this is where we learn that melechet ochel nefesh is permitted on Yom Tov because it says asher yachel lekol nefesh hu levado yaseh lachem, meaning other melachot you cannot do, but those you can. And so what does it mean lekol nefesh? So shomea ani coming to include. Says the Gemara shomea ani afilu nefesh be'ema b'mashma. Since it says lekol nefesh, I understand that nefesh refers not just to you, but also refers to be'ema. You could also cook for a be'ema. Where do we see that that nefesh refers to be'ema? Kinyan shneimar maken nefesh behema yeshamenu. Okay, so I would have thought from the fact that it says lechol nefesh, that includes nefesh be'ema, says the Gemara Talmud lomar. Therefore, the pasuk continues and says lachem, right? Hu levado yaseh lachem, not for every nefesh, which was an inclusion, but this is an exclusion over the page. Lachem velo leklavim, for you and not for animals. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So opinion number 1 in the Tanaim is that when the pasuk comes to teach you Means that you can cook for you on Shabbat, on Yom Tov. Sorry, you can never cook on Shabbat unless it's pikuach nefesh. The comes to teach you that you can cook for you on Yom Tov, but you cannot cook for your animals. That's Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Now Rabbi Akiva says, "Akiva ma'afilu nefesh be'ma b'mashma imken ma tamud lomar lachem." So Rabbi Akiva learns that actually the lachem is coming to exclude something else. He says, "What is it? What does that come to exclude?" Lachem velo le'ovdei. So for you and not for non-Jews. Again, the point is that when the Torah says that you can perform melechet ochal nefesh on Yom Tov, the point is for somebody who's obligated in Yom Tov. For those who observe Yom Tov, you're therefore allowed to cook. But for somebody who's not obligated and is not going to observe Yom Tov like a non-Jew, so they would not be included in that, not in the prohibition, not in the leniency either. So, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, the pasuk comes to teach us you cannot cook for animals on Yom Tov. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's got nothing to do with animals. It's got to do with the fact you can't cook for non-Jews. Presumably, the one which each one says, the other one would disagree with. So the question is this: meaning, why do you choose to include one and not the other? You could very easily say, lechol nefesh means I include something, and lachem means I exclude something. So you could say, why do you say that for Rabbi Akiva saying for animals it's mutar, but for non-Jews that it's going to be asur? Why are you not saying the other way around? So Mara Rabot HaKlavim Lotzit Avdei Kochavim. So he says, Mabeh ani et HaKlavim shemezonotan alecha. Umotzi ani et Avdei Kochavim she'en mezonotan alecha. Says Rabbi Akiva, the reason I include, and I say it's mutar to cook for animals, is because you have a responsibility to feed your animals. Right? Mezonotan alecha. And therefore, it would make sense that the Torah would allow you to provide for them. Whereas another person, another non-Jew, you don't have any sort of obligation to provide for them. They can cook for themselves. And therefore, Torah doesn't need to allow it for you. Okay. Continues the Gemara now from the Torah. Amale Abayin Rav Yosef. Ule Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Te'ama lachem velo leklavim. So now says Abayin to Rav Yosef. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who says that lachem means lachem lo leklavim, meaning he says that it's asur to cook for animals on Yom Tov, or to do any melacha for animals on Yom Tov. It says hanei sufle lechayuta hechi shadidanai. Hanei sufle. These says Rashi. Hanei sufle garinei tmarim. Sort of the seeds from dates. Okay. Hechi shadinan lu, which they would give to the animals. How do you give them to the animals? Says Rashi, since you can't eat them, meaning they're not fit for human consumption. Since we don't allow, according to this opinion, we don't allow one to perform melachot in order to prepare food for the animals, so how are you going to handle them? They're going to be muktzah. So now the answer is, since you can use them as fuel for fire, which you're allowed to add to the fire on Yom Tov, therefore they're not muktzah, therefore there is a human use for them. So teinach be'abeshta, berativta ma'ikalamema. So that is true when they are dry, but when they are wet, the wet ones, what are you going to do? You can't put them into a fire. So the truth is no. If you have a big fire and you're going to add them in, so then they're going to help, and therefore they would not be muktzah. So teinach b'yom tov, b'shabbat ma'ikala meima. So that's all good and well on Yom Tov, when you can use them for asaka, you can add to the fire, that won't be muktzah. But what are you going to say about Shabbat? Shabbat, obviously, you can't add fuel to a fire, that would be muktzah. So, Teinach Yom Tov Shabbat ma'ikala meima. So, metaltelin no agav lifta. Okay, you can carry it with bread. In other words, we have a halacha. You put a piece of bread on top, right? And therefore you're using it to carry the bread. That's what's called tiltul minatzad, and that would be allowed. Right. The question here, which the Gemara then has to address, is what about doing this? You're going to make the bread all sort of it's not going to be fit for eating. You're kind of going to make the bread disgusting, right? Rashi says over here, it's an extra Rashi, you haven't seen it yet. But in order to allow that, you have to say, like the opinion of Shmuel, person does whatever he needs to do with bread. Meaning, even if you're not using it for eating, using it for other things, for carrying as a basis to make something not muktzah. Right? He says, Adam says Rashi, says you can carry it by the bread, and we're not worried that it's a bizyon ochlin, that you're making the bread disgusting or something like that. You're allowed to use it. Okay, so all of that. That was the machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi. But we got into all of this, right? We started off with Rav Huna. Remember, around the beginning of the shiur, Rav Huna was the one who said that you could cook. Essentially, you could cook for the non-Jews, even though you're cooking directly for them, so long as the food is fit for a Jew as well. So it could be used theoretically, but essentially you're cooking for non-Jews, and that would be allowed. Now Rabbi Akiva says that is forbidden. So here says the Gemara, all of this is these are two different shitot. They don't agree with one another. And we are about a third of the way down. Right? Pligi the Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Sorry, what Rav Huna said, right? That everything is that so long as it's chazi, so long as it's ra'oi, for a Jew to consume, then you could eat it. You could cook it for a non-Jew. So that is in contradiction with, that is in machloket with the following opinion. Pliged Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Damar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, mezamnim et anochli b'Shabbat, ve'en mezamnim et anochli b'Yom Tov, gezerah shema yabeh b'shvilo. Okay, it's very, very important halakha. It's very relevant halakha still nowadays, but not everybody is aware of. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says the following. He says you are allowed to invite a non-Jew for Shabbat, right? Mezamnim et anochli b'Shabbat. Ve'en mezamnim et anochli b'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to invite a non-Jew on Yom Tov. Why? Gzerah shema yabeh b'shvilo. We're worried that you're going to come and cook for him. Okay, so clearly what we see from that while the Gemara brings it here, is that according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, there is an isur, there is a prohibition of cooking for a non-Jew on Yom Tov. Right? He's making a gzerah, saying the gzerah is you can't invite somebody, that's a gzerah d'Rabbanan. You can't invite him. Why? Because if you invite him, you might end up cooking for him. Cooking for him would be an isur d'oraita. But you see, according to Rav Huna, who said, right, if I've got somebody at my table and I'm going to make extra food, so the extra food, he might eat it or I might eat it. I'm cooking it for him, but it's chazi for me as well. And therefore, that wouldn't be a problem, according to Rav Huna. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi holds differently. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, no, you're not allowed to even invite him because you might come to cook for him. So as I said, this is a relevant question. Nowadays, it comes up in all sorts of contexts, in terms of kerov, in terms of different things. If you have, are you allowed to invite a non-Jew to your Yom Tov table? Again, to your Shabbos table, you're allowed to, but for Yom Tov, you're not. So the question is, nowadays, again, there's no isur d'oraita in this. In isur d'Rabbanan, it's exact shema yabeh b'shvilo. You might make extra food for him on Yom Tov. So the question the poskim discuss is, could we say that since nowadays many people do not cook anything on Yom Tov anyway, would we say that the gzera still applies? Again, our default position is probably that it would, but there might be some room for leniency there. There was a discussion, maybe we'll see it tomorrow. A number of years ago, there was an exchange of letters between, I don't remember, I think it was the Stipler. I don't remember, but there was I think it appears in the Stipler, talks about maybe Rav Sternbuch and others in terms of hotels. if there's a hotel that's owned by a Jew and you have a non-Jewish guest there as well on Yom Tov, is that going to be a problem in terms of cooking? What might be done and considered inviting a guest, so to speak? Okay, but that is the our default position is that for Yom Tov there's a gzeira not to invite a non-Jew because you might come to cook for him, and that would be an isutra on Yom Tov. Okay, so we said Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, mezamnin tanochli b'Shabbat, ve'en mezamnin tanochli b'Yom Tov. Gzeira shemaya be'b'shvilo. Rav Acha bar Yaakov amar, afilu b'Shabbat nami lo. Okay, so Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, now wait a minute, even on Shabbat you can't invite him. Why? Mishum she'rei kosot. What is she'rei kosot? Means that is because of what is left over in the cups. What is left over in the cups? Let's say you're drinking wine at the meal and you're going to have left over. So if it's a non-Jew who's drinking, who's left over wine that he's been drinking from in a cup, that is now going to be muktzah, because you're not allowed to get any benefit from it. You're not allowed to do anything with that wine. And therefore you're creating that situation of making muktzah. Let's just have a look at Rashi. So Rashi says, "Pligat Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, had Rav Huna de la'erd amar iki yavinan rifta lenuka." Okay, so that's what we saw. That's what we saw earlier. He says, "Sherei kosot shel yayin sheshara bahen pito u'metaltalana shamash latzniya kos." Okay, so he says, so you would have the wine. So they would take the wine and they would dip the bread into the wine. That's what it seems to be. Okay, and then you have this these bits of wine left over in the cup anyway at the end. So usually the shamash would take it and he would put it away, but now it's going to be muktzah. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. Iachi didanami. Okay, says the Gemara, you're worried about that the non-Jew is going to come. You're going to have the sherei kosot that's left over. He says, but it's the same thing. We're going to have sherei kosot, even if it's just Jews at the table. If you have this these cups of wine that you put your bread in, and then you've got it at the end, you put some bread and the wine that's left together, it becomes disgusting. So it's also going to be muktzah, meaning you won't be able to move that either. So he says, didan chazul tanagolin. You could give it, you could feed it to animals, you could feed it to birds, and therefore it's not muktzah. Okay, well if that's the case, so there's also would be the same thing. There would also be not be muktzah for that reason. So now answer the Gemara, okay, there's going to be again we're dealing with wine from a non-Jew, and therefore it's going to be an isur hana'ah. It's going to be an isur hana'ah, and that's why it's going to be muktzah. So it says the Gemara, hang on a sec. So if that's the case, why can't you say we saw before that you would carry something via the bread? You can carry it because of the cup, meaning that which is inside. Maybe that's going to be muktzah, but the cup itself is not muktzah, and as a result of that, you should be able to carry it. Maybe it'll be tiltul min atzad. Okay, so the Gemara over here now is going to go into a little bit of a discussion about muktzah. We'll come back to that tomorrow, and we'll complete that, and we will conclude the sugya over there. All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Hanukkah Sameach, Chodesh Tov. All too.